Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in to another one of my videos. My apologies for not getting this video out a little bit faster. I just started my online schooling this past week, so videos may come out just a little bit slower with that being on my plate now, but I promise to keep getting the videos out whenever time permits me to. So in this video we're going to be discussing the Hebrew letter Peh, which is the 17th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is the 27th path on the tree of life. Peh equates to the number 80, to the tarot card of the Tower, and astrologically it corresponds to the planet Mars. So as far as seeing the Hebrew letters through multiple aspects, represented by the multiple words attached to each one, Peh is going to be a pretty straightforward meaning. And the concept we will be focusing on is how and why Peh relates to the word mouth. Now in studying the word mouth, we will extend its meaning by seeing how Peh also relates to eating as well as feeding, and how it can be used as the mouth of wisdom or the mouth of evil. Another way we will view Peh is by seeing it as the potentials of unstructured energy. We will also spend some time analyzing the 27th path of Peh on the tree of life and how it relates to the concepts we will be exploring. So to begin this discussion, we will first compare the other Hebrew letters which share an intimate connection to Peh through their numeration. The first letter is the letter Chet, which equals 8. 8 is the base number of the letter, or the number 80. Chet is a very complex letter that contains multiple messages, including life, memory, and knowledge, as well as Chet representing a fence or an enclosure. You may be thinking, how in the world do any of these ideas relate to our mouths, the meaning of Peh? Although there are more subtle ways in which to connect Chet and Peh, I will say that the main way in which to view the connection between Chet, Peh, and final Peh, which is the last letter in connection with Peh, is by viewing them as a process of undifferentiated energy, or the storage of all possibilities, which becomes potentials and unstructured energy, finally evolving into potential for cosmic realization in final Peh. I want to make a less obvious connection between the two letters by examining Chet as a fence or enclosure. So if we think about fencing in an area or enclosing an area, we can say that this creates a space in which we may build upon, or a space that is our own. Chet is the undifferentiated energy, which is another way of saying that it is the space which holds the potential for all possibilities. In this space, we may form a structure which supports us, like a house or a building, or even a tower. I bring up this word, tower, because of the tarot card associated with the letter Peh, which is the tower. This is a card that we will be revisiting a few times throughout this video. So when I hear the word tower, I think of two main ideas that are associated with the tower. The first thing that comes to mind is a more fantasy-like or medieval-like association, where I think of a tower as being heavily guarded. If you think of our point of views or perception of life, we work so hard to keep our reality from changing because we crave security in our lives. Now, a tower is a structure, and just like our sense of reality, our sense of self and all the traits and characteristics that allow this self-identity to exist are things which we use to keep our structure of reality, or our structure of self, in place. So in other words, we can build multiple structures which help support the idea of who we think we are. Let's use an example. An athlete goes throughout their life saying, "I am a basketball player. It's what I do. I play for this team now, but soon I will attend college and play for another team. After college, I plan on playing for the NBA, and this will become my career and a means of supporting myself financially." Although they say, "I am a basketball player," and this is the main trait or description they will give to others when asked to describe themselves, At the core, it is not who they are. It is only a structure which helps to describe or explain how they see themselves in their reality, as well as their experience in this life. Now let's say through a series of events, this person becomes a victim of a tragic accident that leaves them paralyzed or injured in another sort of way, taking away their ability to play basketball for the rest of their life. Now, does this person cease to exist, or is their reality just drastically changing and shifting from the accident? The idea is that a structure they have built up and kept for so long, helping to support who they think they are, has just tumbled to the ground, and now they are forced to erect a new tower from the debris of the old one. Most of these structures allow us to feel a sense of security because it promotes a stable sense of self. It may be uncomfortable for someone to wake up each day imagining they are a new or different person, seeing a new sense of reality. It is also uncomfortable for many of us to live as no one, simply saying, I am, rather than, I am John or I am Emily. So going back to the idea of a tower being heavily guarded, our sense of self-identity is something that we guard heavily. We guard our structures of self, or towers of self, with heavy security, avoiding anything that threatens to invade those towers or knock them down. This is why one of the hardest things to do for many humans is to accept change, especially when that change is at a drastic degree. This is why we would rather participate in what we already know or what is safe and routine for us, rather than dive into the unknowable or unpredictable. It is also why we as humans are always usually seeking out pleasure and security, rather than facing pain and what makes us feel uncomfortable. The other way in which I like to view this idea of a tower is by trying to continuously build upon the same tower, or to make it bigger. What I mean by this is when something is no longer serving us in our lives, or it is requiring too much work to uphold simply because we need it in order to feel like ourselves, we have to keep building upon that tower just to keep it around, even when it becomes unstable. It can also refer to the pressures of the world that we live in, and how so many people live under the influence of the idea that we must be materially or financially successful in order to be held to a degree of respect and importance. So many people are using their time in trying to attain titles, statuses, and objects that make their tower or sense of self bigger than other people's. It is like trying to be the tallest tower in a city of buildings. Now let's take this idea of chet as an enclosure, which allows us to build our tower. And you can say that this enclosure, in a microcosmic sense of the human, is our perception in all of the endless possibilities in which we can view reality as well as ourselves. Now let's tie in one of the other words of chet to this, one that will tie in later with the concept of our mouths. Chet, as memory, is one major tool that allows us to build and uphold these towers. Just think about it. Without our memory, think of how different life would be. In a sense, we would be most likely spending less time in trying to maintain these towers we build, these structures of self. What is one of the motivating principles behind why we don't want to create a change or let things go? It is our memory, creating a picture of what we once had and still want, or reminding us of what we want and consistently trying to attain it. The memory works in both past and present, which shapes the present. It also works in the future, which shapes the present. Without the memory, we would forget what our future goals were, as well as what our past experiences have shown us. So now let's move into Peh for a brief moment. Peh is the number 80, as we have mentioned, or 8 multiplied by 10. As I just mentioned, Peh means mouth. So going back to the idea of an enclosure, and it relating to the possibilities in which we can shape the structure of our perception, and how we see the world around us. What is one of the most powerful ways in which to do this? Through the action of our words. How we speak these words is through the use of our mouths. Words have extreme power, many times holding even more power over one than physical actions do. In fact, words help to fuel our physical actions in many ways. I highly advise that you take some time after watching this video, or maybe even before continuing to watch any further, to look into the power of words and their application in shaping our reality, as well as their effects on our conscious and subconscious minds. Another association between Peh and Chet is the power of words used in creating memories as well as reinforcing them. So when we finally grasp the understanding of just how powerful our words can be, we begin to possess a very powerful tool for our own spiritual development. This leads to the last letter associated with Peh. And just like our last video on Zadi, this is a final form of a Hebrew letter, that being the final form of Peh. One way in which we can view final Peh is by seeing it as cosmic knowledge. Remember I mentioned how the letters with the numerations from 100 to 900 are in a cosmic level. Once we learn to utilize the power of our words for the greater good, promoting our own spiritual growth and using words to heal and encourage others, we evolve into the final form of Peh, and we obtain great cosmic knowledge. It requires a higher form of knowledge in order to harness our words toward a greater good. Take a moment and reflect on the words you speak each day. Do you find yourself speaking ill of others? Do you find yourself speaking ill of yourself, putting yourself down in ways? Do you find yourself saying you can't do something often? Do you find yourself speaking judgments toward the action of others? We all do this in one way or another, and what we fail to realize is that these words come back to affect us in one way or another. Once we learn the power of silence, we may learn to think before we speak, choosing very carefully the words we wish to release from our mouths. We possess a great cosmic knowledge or awareness. Now that we have examined the two letters intimately connected to Peh, let us explore the idea of the mouth more. So take a moment to think about how much we utilize the power of words throughout different spiritual and religious systems. Whether we are chanting mantras, intoning divine names of power for magical purposes, reciting prayers and spells, reciting holy passages, or using positive affirmations. Just by seeing how, in the world of spiritual and mystical practices, the practice of learning to use words to affect our consciousness are such an important aspect. This is learning to use Peh as potentials of unstructured energy, or the alternatives of the living energy. We learn to use it in order to shape our worlds, which are more in line with our spiritual intentions. Words of power, when used in these practices, help to tear down our personal towers, allowing us to see ourselves more as part of the whole rather than separate from it. In Hermeticism, we are traveling the path of what is called the Great Work, and what this entails is to not use our spiritual wisdom in order to simply benefit ourselves. Of course, we need to learn to work on ourselves and to love ourselves before we can truly give it back to others. However, at a certain point in our journeys, we must learn to give back to others in order to benefit the world in which we share with them. We begin to see ourselves as part of the collective whole, which allows us to have the wisdom in how to use our words. When we speak words of love, compassion, encouragement, we are essentially giving this same energy back to ourselves, and the same is true for hateful speech we may exercise. Positive speech can build a person up to great heights. Everything comes back to us as a law of cause and effect. When words are spoken from the soul, we do our part in helping to bring the world more into a state of harmony. At first, this may only be reflected in our own inner world and sense of perception. However, changing is a snowball effect, and it begins with our own personal harmony, which then affects others. Peh, the mouth, is one of the strongest tools in order to create this change. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Many people have different viewpoints as to what this biblical statement represents, and there for sure are different ways that we can perceive these words. One of the ways in which I see this is as representing vibration, like how the yogis in the Eastern world say that the sound of Om is the sound of the universe, or the sound of life, a constant vibration of life. When we speak words, we are using vibratory patterns, which have an impact on our reality as they leave our mouths. God can represent a verb rather than a noun, representing the ongoing act of creation and the creative substance that we ourselves contain in order to create and even destroy. Although we have physical ears to pick up the phenomenon of sound, notice that as you are hearing someone's words, even your own, it is an internal experience. Therefore, we can say that when we speak words to a person, these vibratory rates of sound enter them, having an impact on them. The same goes for the words in which we speak to ourselves and about ourselves. So earlier I mentioned the idea of the mouth of wisdom. What I have just explained in regards to learning how to harness our creative power with words creates a deeper sense of wisdom within. This also applies to learning when to keep our mouths shut, as in practicing the importance of silence. In the Kabbalah, in reference to the tree of life, there are 32 paths of wisdom. In the human mouth, there are 32 teeth. This is not a mere coincidence, as we were designed to embody the Creator in and outside of our bodies. This gives us a clue that we must learn to use our mouths for the purpose of wisdom, speaking from the deepness of our souls and not from the shallowness of our egos. Remember how in the last video on Zadi, I mentioned the letter Tet as an archetypal letter that relates to the idea of formation. Some say that the shape of Peh can be seen as Tet turned to its side. What this shows us is how we use this energy of formation through the use of our mouths. If we also examine the full spelling of Peh, which is Peh, He, it is the only other Hebrew letter other than He itself which contains the letter He. The letter He is directly linked to the idea of life. So we now see this unstructured energy and our potential in creating structures with it is in direct relation to life itself. Now that we have discussed the more constructive, positive aspect of the mouth, as in the mouth of wisdom, let us direct our focus onto the evil mouth, another meaning of Peh. In these times, it is not difficult to find the evil mouth in everyday life. Seeing how so many speak to one another with words of hate, judgment, harassment, and criticism, I am sure that you can think of a time, a memory that still stays with you, where hateful or hurtful words were projected on you, having a negative effect, one that may still stick with you to this day. How many children are shaped by painful memories in which a parent emotionally abuses them or puts them down, or even through being a victim of bullying in school? These moments and memories have a drastic effect on how we look at ourselves and the world around us, especially in the formative years of our lives. Most of the time, the negative, harsh words that leave our mouths come from a place of fear within us. This fear is deeply connected to the ego, and when it feels threatened or hurt, it wishes to lash out, usually through the words that cut deep into the heart of one another. It is true that the letter Peh can be seen as a double-edged sword used for good or for harm. In the letter on Tav, the first video I made, I brought up the word Pharaoh when discussing the stories of Moses leading the people of Israel from the bonds of Egypt. In Hebrew, the word Pharaoh is spelt Peh, Resh, Ein, He. Now the letters of this word contain two other words. The first and last letters, Peh and He, obviously spell the letter Peh, as we already discussed. And we also know that the word means mouth. Now the last remaining letters, Resh and Ayin, spell out Ra, which is a word meaning evil. So the word Pharaoh means evil mouth. In the Tav video, we also discussed how the Pharaoh of Egypt can represent the ego. Now do you see this connection between one's ego and the use of the evil mouth? The Pharaoh was the one enslaving the people of Israel in the land of Egypt, called Mitzrayim, which can signify restraints or borders. In the Tav video, I also discussed how Israel represents spiritual consciousness, or a higher form of consciousness. So in other words, the Pharaoh is the evil mouth, which serves the ego, restraining the consciousness from growing into a higher expression. It is no wonder why Moses was 80 years of age, the letter Peh, when he led the Israelites. He was also 80 years of age when transmitting the Torah to them as well. So as I mentioned when discussing the nature of our words of kindness, words spoken from the soul, it works to create harmony in our lives, and what we say to others is truly what we get back. Now the same principle applies when speaking from the ego. The more we speak to ourselves and others from this point of view, the more we feed and reinforce the power of the Pharaoh, which makes us a slave to it even longer. Our inner world becomes built on disharmony, judgment, tension, prejudices, and hate. This disharmony is then reflected into our outer world even more, and all we seem to see are these same principles in life and in others. The world appears through a lens of ugliness, because that is how we are structuring it to be. In the card of the tower, there are often people which are depicted as falling out of the tower, sometimes wearing royal garments and crowns. Now, this is a really beautiful way of showing us that when these personal towers of ours are struck with divine truth, in which the ego can't ignore, it loses its power, overruling some aspect of our personality. The lightning strike of truth casts these pharaohs, these rulers in their royal garments and crown, down from their elusive towers, and they crumble with the debris. Now I hope you can see the significance of the letter Peh as the unstructured energy in which we use our mouths to either heal or hurt, create or destroy, uplift or put down. As I previously mentioned, I highly recommend you look more into the power behind words after watching this video. Any spiritual practitioner should be aware of this power, as it has much to do with assisting in their growth or even working against it. So with all this in mind, let's take a slight detour and discuss an archangelic name, which has much to do with the mouth, as it has the letter Peh in its spelling. And this is not something we normally focus on in our videos, but I think this one is pretty important as to what we're talking about. So this is the Archangel Raphael that I'm referring to. In Hebrew, Raphael is spelled Resh, Peh, Aleph, Lamed. It comes from the root word Rapha, which means to heal. The letters Aleph and Lamed, spelling El, means of God. Therefore, Raphael can be seen as the healing of God. Now notice the two other letters in this name, which are Resh and Peh. It is peculiar how the letters for head and mouth are both found in this name. As the Archangel of Air, we can say that Raphael relates to our thoughts and words, as these both have an airy nature to them, and both the head and the mouth relate to thoughts and words as well. One way in which to view the nature of Raphael is by understanding just what our thoughts and words do for us. Notice how Resh comes first, however, in its spelling, showing that our thoughts can influence our mouths, yet it is ultimately up to us as to what we choose to use our words for. The healing of God, Raphael, is the ability to empower our words to heal the soul by using our resh and peh, our head and mouth, to feed the divine side of ourselves, rather than reinforcing the ego. It is also the ability to have a healing effect upon others by empowering our words to benefit them rather than harm them. So as I mentioned earlier, Peh is associated with the planet Mars. There is a very significant correlation between the nature of Mars and the use of the mouth. First of all, Mars represents our vital life force, which one can say is unstructured energy. It is the energy we contain which allows us to create structures, whether good or bad, positive or negative. If you are familiar with the mythology and nature of Mars, you will know that it can be viewed as a sort of violent, explosive planet, being that it is known as the god of war. When we think of war, our minds may resort to ideas such as destruction, violence, hurting, harm, etc. This can remind us of how destructive and harmful our words can be when spoken through the evil mouth. Now, what many people do not realize is that along with the more violent side of Mars, Mars was also associated with the power of crop fertility. When one thinks of crops, the idea of growth and nourishment may come to mind. This is a clever way of showing how our words can become seeds that are planted within us and others, that may blossom into something useful and nourishing to the soul. So with all this material we have discussed in regards to Peh and the use of the mouth to structure our reality, let's examine the 27th path of Peh. On the Tree of Life, this path connects the Sephirah of Netzach to Hod. Netzach is the Sephirah connected to our emotions, and Hod, our intellect. These two Sephirot then connect to the Sephirah of Yesod, which contains our image of self-identity as well as the ego. Together, these form a triangular relationship. Do you see how much of an impact that emotion and intellect have on our ego? The path of Peh, the mouth, is the mediator between the emotions and intellect, building structures that support the ego. Notice, though, that Tiferet also connects to Yesod, showing that it can be affected by the higher self or higher state of consciousness. If you look at the Sephirah of Geburah above Tiferet, you will see that Geburah is the planet of Mars, just like the path of Peh. It directly flows into Tiferet, where it becomes solar infused. Now notice the word soul for sun is pronounced the same as what we call the human soul. From Tiferet, this Mars energy flows into Netzach through the path of Nun, or Scorpio. Scorpio is ruled by Mars, although it is a watery sign. Then from Netzach, the martial energy flows through Peh into Hod. This is very fascinating because it shows that this energy can be channeled into a higher expression, and this is what we must learn to do through the path of Peh. We must build towers which help support our higher divine selves rather than our lower animalistic selves. When we are working with Tiferet, though, notice it still has an effect on Yesod through the path that directly links them together. The numeration of Peh is 80, and this is the same numeration as Yesod when we spell out Yesod. Yesod means foundation, so this really shows us how our mouth is the foundation which helps build and tear these structures down. The last point of focus we'll discuss regarding Peh is relating it to the concepts of eating and feeding, both functions we use the mouth for. Remember how I mentioned the idea of having 32 teeth, which corresponds to the 32 paths of wisdom? Focus on this word wisdom for a moment. There is a Sephirah on the Tree of Life which literally means wisdom, and that is Chokmah, the Father, the wisdom of the divine. I also mentioned how Mars, Geburah, feeds into Tiferet. There's another path in which we find Mars connecting to Tiferet, and that is the path of the Emperor, or Aries, which is ruled by Mars. This connects wisdom, Chokmah, to the Sephirah of Tiferet, where we may receive that wisdom of the divine. Kabbalists say that Peh acts as a window in the physical realm, which connects us to the wisdom of the divine. This can be seen as the human's ability to speak and to give praise to the divine, something no other being on earth can do. Speech plays a major role in not only the creation of our own stories in life, but to the creation of life itself. One should look into the Kabbalistic book of the Sefer Yetzirah, which will help explain the importance of speech in regards to creation. This is why we call the Hebrew alphabet the letters of creation. So going back to the concept of eating, this refers to our ability to eat words, which is really a clever way of saying we learn to understand or ingest the words of the divine, or the laws and wisdom of creation, in order to digest them, or in other words, apply them to our lives in a useful manner. Words of wisdom are like food for our soul, in which we learn to eat, taking us closer to the revelation of who we truly are at the core. In Jeremiah 15:16, it is said, "Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of mine heart. For I am called by thy name, O Lord, God of hosts." Now with the concept of feeding, the same principle we just discussed may apply, only vice versa. Once we possess divine wisdom, we may help to spread this wisdom to others through the use of our mouth, our Peh. Now you may see how the mouth becomes this divine tool. We are essentially feeding our others' wisdom or words to eat, to digest, and to apply to their own self, their own lives, allowing them to spiritually grow. So I hope these concepts help to paint a bigger picture of the letter Peh and the use of the mouth, seeing that it is this divine tool we possess and we're able to use it like no other creature on this earth. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please reach out to me. I will be back as soon as I can with a new video, which will be on the letter Ayin. I look forward to creating this video for you. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen and to view my video. I will see you guys soon.